Hello, welcome to the latest You Are My Borough with myself, Dom Shaw, and Scott Wilson, both from the Northern Echo. And we are going to dish out our awards of the season, aren't we, Scott?
We are. Yeah, it's end of term report time. So we'll see how we go, and then we'll see if you agree. And whatever we say, I'm sure there'll be some you agree with and some you don't. So drop us a line, drop us a comment underneath. Let us know what you think. We definitely read them all. And it would be great to know if you agree or is probably more likely disagree with some of our picks.
Yeah, if it's anything like the player ratings response we usually get on a Saturday night,
yeah, exactly.
More disagree than agree. Yeah, we feel like the dust has settled slightly since last week, so it might not be as painful to do it now as it might have been initially.
As it would have been, yeah.
That defeat to Coventry, and obviously we'll try not to mention a game that might be taking place somewhere in London this weekend.
Yes.
Yeah. But before we get started and dish out our various awards, Scott, now the dust has settled. I know the obviously overriding feeling at the end is disappointment, but still been some season for Borough, really, especially when you consider how they started.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's going to be pretty painful watching Coventry and Luton play at Wembley and one of them celebrate when they go up. Obviously, probably more so if it ends up being Coventry, which incidentally, I think it might. So if you're watching this and Luton have already won, then there's another one we've got wrong. But anyway, yeah, I think that's it. I think now that we're a little bit away from that, you've got to look back and remember what things were like in the autumn when it felt like Borough were on a real downward spiral, and you just wondered how bad it was going to get. You know, off the pitch, you were hearing all kinds of things about things not being right behind the scenes, recruitment clashes, the manager not getting on with those above him, starting to get little ricks within the dressing room. It just didn't feel right at all. And clearly that was translating on the pitch because Borough was shipping goals left, right and centre, could barely buy a win. And it looked like a relegation battle was potentially in the offing. Obviously, there's the change of manager. There's that little interim period when we had Leo and it was all a bit strange. And yeah, Borough got a couple of positive results, but it still felt very unstable. It still felt like they were only, one more bad run away from being right in the thick of trouble. So to get from that to where we are now, A, we know that Borough performed on the pitch. B, we know that they have the core of a really good squad. Yes, they've clearly lost loan players. Yes, there's going to have to be signings in the summer, but the core of that squad is there. And then, as we alluded to in the pod at the start of the week, I think the biggest thing is just that we have a club again that's pulling in the same direction, that are singing from the same hymn sheet, that the recruitment arm is working in tandem with the coaching arm, and it just feels like they can get this right this summer. Whereas the last couple of summers, behind the scenes, we've known that there's been heads being banged together recruitment-wise. I don't think, hand on heart, that's going to be the case this summer.
No, I think when you look back at recent summers, it's not difficult to make the case of Borough being in the strongest position they've been in for a fair few years at the start of pre-season. Now, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen between now and the start of pre-season, and obviously there are loan players to replace, but the foundations, as you discussed there, are undoubtedly in place, aren't they?
Well, under each of the last two managers, I think you can look at what Borough have done in a transfer window, and okay, some of this is with the benefit of hindsight. I accept that. But it's fairly easy to tick off names and say, okay, that was the manager's signing.
100%.
That was the recruitment team signing. That's one that they maybe both agreed with. That's one that the manager put his foot down and they let him have. Let's see what happens. But I'll be amazed if come the end of this transfer window, we're sitting there saying, well, it's pretty obvious that Michael Carrick's wanted them, Kieran Scott's wanted them. They've kind of come to an agreement about them. The recruitment team have been pushing for them. I don't think that'll happen. I think what you'll see at the end of this window is a group of signings that everyone's in agreement with and everybody's on board with and that actually fit an overarching plan as opposed to being, well, a bit of what the recruitment team want to do, but a bit of what the manager was digging his heels with and saying, no, that's what I need in the Championship. I think that's probably going to be the biggest plus this summer, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Let's crack on with our awards.
Yes.
The first one being
Borough Reporter of the Year. Are we going with that first?
Yeah, the what? Sorry,
Borough Reporter of the Year.
Well, just on there when you were saying about what we've got right and wrong, I've noticed that we've had a few comments on our pre-Coventry pods and videos in recent days from non-Borough fans. You've got to
seen them.
There's us confidently claiming Borough are going to coast
good.
to the final. Yeah, you've got to take the rough for the smooth, haven't you?
Haven't you just?
Player of the season. Is it an obvious one to start with?
Yeah, it has to be, doesn't it? At some stage, we'll be all football hipsterish and we'll pluck something from nowhere and pretend we know what's going on and, blah, blah, blah. But it's got to be Chuba, hasn't it? I mean, for a whole host of, just by sheer weight of goals, if nothing else, he's rewritten Borough's kind of history books, which is remarkable, really. Then obviously the fact that this time last year he was nowhere. Even come July in the start of, not quite the start of August, but July, he was nowhere. I mean, it was only the fact that Chris Wilder couldn't get a couple of signings over the line that meant he was in the squad for that final pre-season game against Marseille, that meant he started the first game of the season, that meant that was where it went from then. And then obviously the change of position under Carrick. Now, you can make arguments that there have been really important players in other positions, and I think we've discussed just how big a miss Johnny Howson was in the playoff semi-finals, and the fact that he is probably the kind of unsung glue that knits this Borough team together. But I don't think you can look past Chuba for Player of the Year. No, do you?
No. Even if forget the backstory, even purely on the merits of, like you say, scoring those goals and winning the Championship Player of the Season and the Championship Golden Boot Award, he's the runaway Player of the Season. And then you add in the element of, like you say there, the fact that he said on a number of occasions, hasn't he? He came back in the summer waiting for his agent to tell him where he was going next. He never considered that he might have a future at Borough. And then it was interesting talking to Josh Coburn, where are we, earlier this month it'll have been, when Coburn was obviously injured with Akpom. So Akpom had come back into the scene, hadn't he? Come back into the team, back into the first team fold, and then got that injury after maybe 2 games. And Coburn was saying then, kind of behind the scenes, Akpom was working so incredibly hard because I guess at that stage he sensed that he had an opportunity that he didn't think was ever going to come his way at the start of the season. And he looked the most distraught, didn't he, of all the players after
he did.
Coventry.
Yeah, he did.
And I guess you understand why, because this has been the dream season, hasn't it? I think that he's talked this season about how he hasn't gone on the pitch kind of hoping he's going to score, but believing he's going to score. And I think it'll be the same with promotion. He'll have genuinely believed that this season was going to end with promotion, and it would have capped off what has been a remarkable campaign. The challenge now for Akpom is obviously building on it and showing that this isn't a one season thing.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting because he's clearly a marked man now. Opposition teams are going to look at Borough, look at Chuba Akpom and think, well, if you stop Chuba Akpom, you go a long way towards stopping Borough. And up until maybe the last month or couple of months of the season, he hadn't necessarily had that. So I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic. And then, he's just got to prove that this hasn't been a flash in the pan season. Now, there's no reason why it should have been. And at various stages along his journey this season, I think you've thought, well, is this going to regress? Is this just a purple patch? Well, it's a blooming long purple patch now if it is one. So there's no reason why he can't sustain it, but he still has got to prove that, hasn't he? That he can do this season after season after season.
Young Player of the Season feels as obvious as Player of the Season.
Yeah, go on. You can say the name first.
Hayden Hackney. It's got to be, hasn't it? And I get again, like Akpom. Forget what's gone before. Just on what's happened on the pitch, he's obviously again the standout Young Player of the Season. But it's all the more remarkable when you consider that, only a year earlier he was at Scunthorpe, who had that rotten season, got relegated to the National League. He was nowhere near the first team picture under Chris Wilder, and let's be honest, that doesn't reflect particularly well on Wilder now. And yet, since Carrick's given him his chance, he's absolutely been one of the standout midfield players in the Championship, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a good point there that, the backstory is great with Hackney as it is with Akpom, the whole Scunthorpe loan thing, coming back, nowhere near the team. Probably gets in because Craig Little's part of that caretaker group and has obviously worked with him in the academy and has probably had a word in Leo's ear and said, look, give this lad a chance. So that's a great story. But you're right, just purely on his footballing performances and his footballing ability, his kind of rate of progress over the last 6 months or so has just been fantastic. Now, again, the interesting thing will be, how can he sustain that? Can he sustain it? And how does he keep his levels up there next season? Because, to a certain extent, he's been on a roll, hasn't he? He's had momentum, bit of adrenaline, etc., etc. But there'll be expectations on him now. Next season, he will be expected to be one of Borough's chief playmakers and one of the best central midfielders in the Championship. Can he live up to that and do it? Because if he can, then clearly the next step is Premier League, dare we say, even international level, etc., whether that's with Borough or not. So, he's probably one more good season in the Championship away from being the next name that Premier League clubs are going to come knocking for, because he's young enough that another season in the Championship is only going to make him more desirable, not less.
And Johnny Howson's benefits and strengths are talked about constantly, aren't they, by Michael Carrick and any coach he's worked with. The fact that he might not necessarily be a shouter, but he leads by example. And I think we've seen that with Hackney, haven't we? Having Howson alongside him has no doubt been hugely beneficial over the course of the season.
It's helped him. It's given him the freedom to play on the pitch. So it's given him the freedom to push forward, to make breaks, to be adventurous, to take risks, because Howson's so great alongside him there. But I think you're right. I think it's more just it's the maturity of the performances now and the way that he's grown up on the pitch. An awful lot of that has to do with Johnny Howson. And hopefully also is a reflection of Hackney's character, because I'm just thinking there, if we'd given these awards in the last 2 seasons, then the 2 winners of the Young Player Award would probably have been Jed Spence and Isaiah Jones. And both of those, where are their careers at the minute? They certainly haven't gone the way that you had envisaged it. Now, everything about Hackney points to the fact that he's that should hopefully not be a problem with him, because he seems remarkably level-headed, very mature, gets on with his game. Now, I'm not saying that Jed and Isaiah weren't, but they've clearly had issues that they've struggled to overcome and that have knocked their career back a bit. Let's hope that doesn't happen with Hackney next season. I don't see any reason why it would.
Disappointment of the season is where it might get a little bit more difficult. I've got 3.
Well, I've got a very, very obvious one that, the Coventry playoff. Let's get that out of the way straight away.
Yeah.
That goes without saying. Certainly the home leg. In hindsight, probably the away came away from the away leg thinking, Borough, that's fine. Borough have done what they needed to do there. In hindsight, Borough's best chance to win that semi-final probably came in that first 15 minutes at Coventry, and they didn't really they didn't capitalise on it, did they? And then the home leg was obviously a massive disappointment. So that's the obvious one. The one that I would say maybe slightly less obvious, Rodrigo Muniz.
I've got him down as well.
Have you got him down as well? I mean,
yeah.
What a disappointment he was, because, listen, Borough wanted Muniz for the best part of a year and a half. I mean, he was the number 1 striker choice in that summer that he went to Fulham. I remember writing countless stories about how Borough were on the brink. Neil Bowser had been over to Brazil, hadn't he? Over to South America. That was the famous pre-season game. I think it was at York, where Neil Warnock was kind of saying, I don't know where my chief exec is, somewhere over the world. You know more than him. Well, he was trying to sign Muniz. They didn't get him. He goes to Fulham. Borough finally then do get him. And you think, okay, he's going to be... Listen, if you'd said the day before the season started, a Borough player is going to finish as the Championship's top scorer and be the Championship Player of the Year, you'd have said, oh, well, this Muniz loan's worked then, hasn't it? Muniz is going to be brilliant.
Yeah.
What went wrong? You know, he never really looked comfortable on the pitch, did he? And then clearly that's then fed into the fact that, you know, I don't want to say he's tossed it off because that's not fair, but Michael Carrick's clearly had a look at him and thought, no, I'm just not having this. I'm not happy with your attitude. I'm not happy with what you're doing. And, you know, to be completely frozen out of the picture like he was, you know, that has to go down as a major disappointment, doesn't it? Because there's clearly a player there. You know, Fulham and Borough have watched him extensively enough to think that there's a player there. We never really saw it in the little bits that he had on the pitch. And then, like I say, he's been missing in action for the best part of 6 or 7 months because Borough couldn't engineer a way to get him back to Fulham and then get him back out somewhere else in January, which they clearly were trying to do. So I'd have him very high on that list as well. So that's 2 of your 3, is it? So what's your third?
Can you guess the third?
A player or a moment or what?
A player.
Well, it won't be a keeper. Isaiah Jones.
Isaiah Jones, yeah. And I think that's slightly harsh given what we were saying there about Hackney and how difficult it is for a young player. I do think it's natural, the kind of natural cycle of a young player to emerge, to break through, and then have a bit of a difficult spell. Like you say, they become a marked man then. Jones was an unknown quantity, wasn't he? And I think in hindsight now, the kind of signs were there at the end of the season before last. Not necessarily in the way he was playing, but teams at that stage were able to double up on Jones because Borough was so reliant on him.
Yeah.
Now, if you think back to this year, when Tommy Smith was signed, Chris Wilder made it absolutely clear he was coming in as a deputy for Jones.
Yeah.
It was going to be wing backs. Jones was given the number 2 shirt. He was clearly going to be first choice. And, you know, when you look back to Chris Wilder's final game when he dropped Jones and Giles, which clearly didn't work out very well for him. But at that stage, there was kind of real surprises to, you know, how can you drop Isaiah Jones?
Yeah. Do you think he has to play as a wing back? Because obviously I think that has affected his chances under Carrick, is that he's not defensively good enough, I don't think, to play as a right back in a 4.
No.
But I'm massively convinced about him as an out-and-out winger. I think wing-back is his position. And obviously
but he came as more of a winger, didn't he? He came as a winger more than a wing-back.
He did. Yeah, he did. He did. But I think that's his position. And obviously, Borough don't play with wing-backs. So, you know, he had that one moment, or that half a game, didn't he, when he first came back and you thought, okay, there's something there. But then 4 or 5 appearances since have been pretty underwhelming. And, you know, it's going to be an interesting summer in terms of Isaiah Jones because, you know, if a half reasonable offer came in, would Borough sell? I suspect they probably would.
Is now his stock as kind of high as it's ever. Well, his stock obviously isn't as high as it was last summer, but you know, where's going to be another year down the line? Because you would think that if everyone's fit, judging on the evidence of this season, and obviously things can change over the summer dramatically. You know, Hayden Hackney will tell you that, and other players. But on the evidence of this season, Marcus Forss is ahead of him in the pecking order.
Yeah.
When Aaron Ramsey was there, I know he played more on the left, but as an attacking winger, he was ahead.
And you would suspect that's a position that Borough are going to look to strengthen. You know,
the wide. Going to have to. Yeah,
it's so important to the way Carrick plays. The one other one that I would add on the disappointment list, and only because it was the one moment really all season that fed into that kind of typical Borough narrative, was the Huddersfield defeat.
Huddersfield, yeah.
Because
he had to get in here somehow.
Every Borough fan that I spoke to in the build up to that game said they'll lose here to Warnock. And I wasn't buying that. But then, sure enough, you know, 15 mad minutes and actually a defeat that, you know, listen, top 2 was probably never actually in reach, was it? But it certainly wasn't after that day.
No, but it felt it before that day, didn't it? Like we were saying in last week's, that felt the day where, in actual fact, it might not be realistic. Signing of the season, I think you can make a case. I think you can make a case for Stefan, Lenihan, Giles, Ramsey only played 11 games, but still he made an impact.
Yeah.
Archer, I've gone with Giles because I thought he suited Carrick's system perfectly. I remember speaking to Giles, I think it was at York, when he talked about he came in because he looked at Chris Wilder's system and he thought he was going to be the perfect fit. And he'd had a disappointing loan spell at Blackburn, really, when he'd started in the team, but lost his place under Tony Mowbray. But he has just been the perfect fit for Carrick's system, hasn't he? And 11 assists, countless chances laid on. Him and Akpom, a pretty perfect partnership, really. So as I say, I think you can make a case for many, but I've given Giles the nod.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely strong mentions for Stefan, Lenihan and Archer. Probably in particular Stefan and Lenihan, because they've obviously been there all season. And to be fair to both of those, right at the start, I certainly had question marks about both of those signings. I think most Borough fans probably did. You know, Stefan had his odd shaky moment. Lenihan, definitely took time to settle. Didn't necessarily suit the system that Wilder was playing or trying to get him to play. So both of them have just developed brilliantly and have been absolutely superb in the second half of the season. But I'm with you. I just don't think you can look past how important Giles has been to Borough's attacking play. And then actually, yes, he's not the greatest defender in the world, but he's not the worst in the Championship by any stretch of the imagination. He can do the job defensively, but he just gives you so much attacking-wise in terms of the quality of his delivery and the timing of those runs down the flank. The way that if Force or Akpom or McGree were pulling outside, he's quite happy to come inside. If Borough can get him back, he will be one of the signings of the summer because he's that good and that important to the way they play now. I know you've done a piece on this in the paper tomorrow, and Lopetegui's being pretty non-committal at Wolves. Looks like he wants to look at him in pre-season and then see where it goes from there. But it's a big gap Borough have to fill because you're not going to get many Ryan Gileses in the Championship, are you?
Well, when you say they're a big gap, that's what made me think. If you think back to Borough's team last season, if there was one player, if you went through and said, right, if there's one player who you can't have for a key game here, I'm not saying Giles would be the one because obviously, Akpom, Stefan, Archer, the way he played, but Giles would have certainly been in the conversation, wouldn't he? Just because of what he offered down that left side. Mark Bowler as a deputy doing probably a more solid defender than Giles, but going forward, just doesn't offer anywhere near as much. Probably no left back in the Championship does. That's no slight on Bowler. Giles is just so effective at what he does, isn't he?
Yeah, I completely agree. He's you're not going to get very many Championship fullbacks at that level ever. And like you say, he just suited so well the way Akpom and Archer were wanting to play in that second half of the season. And both of them undoubtedly owe an awful lot of their goal scoring tally to the fact that Giles was pinging in those crosses that he was.
On the subject of goals, what was your goal of the season?
Yeah, I did have a little watch back of 4 or 5 that triggered in my memory to just remind me. And I'm going to give an honourable mention to Tuba's 2 against Blackpool, which was a kind of individual goal from the edge of the area. The other was at the end of a really nice 1-2 with McGree where he popped it through and he scored. But I think it's McGree against Norwich. It's a kind of force flick on, isn't it? And the ball kind of half bounces up on the edge of the area and McGree kind of carve volley almost like a scissor scorpion kick into the top corner. Brilliant finish.
That's what I went with,
hasn't he? He scored 2 or 3 really good goals this year, but that will be the one, McGree against Norwich.
The one that sprung out to me, I think it was Hull, when it was back to front, and I think Borough might have tweeted afterwards from Zach to front because it obviously started with Zach Stefan, and it was kind of classic Carrick ball. That I'm sure it was Hull. That comes to mind, but McGree. I think that goal at Norwich has to be the one. And on the subject of that moment of the season, I've gone with that Norwich win purely because I was there that day. It was the final day before the World Cup stoppage. And Borough, you forget really. You look back at the league table now. That win against Norwich that day, Borough moved up to 14th in the table.
Yeah.
They started the day 16th. The game before that, when they won at Blackpool, they were below Blackpool in the table before they beat Blackpool 3-0. And so then to beat Blackpool, obviously they kind of built that head of steam and momentum. But I think just to take such a boost into the World Cup break after a win against the Norwich team that were 5th at the time, felt so huge. And the manner of the, Matt Crooks, big goal last minute. It's kind of like the perfect away end moment, isn't it? A last minute winner in a game that you probably weren't fancying to win. The other game that comes to mind is obviously Sheffield United win.
I think that was going to be mine. That would be mine, I think. Just because it felt like the moment when everything came together for Carrick's team and the way he wanted them to play. And obviously, it was the night when you really felt, this is top two is properly on it. And now, obviously, it didn't turn out to be that way. But it felt like it had been a date that was in the calendar for weeks and weeks. And you thought, if Borough can be within touch and distance of Sheffield United and then go and beat them, they're going to do this. Then obviously they do go and beat them. They do it playing brilliant kind of counter-attack and slice knife through butter football. It's live on Sky. Everybody's watching it. It felt a little bit as well like the first time the rest of the country kind of said, oh, wow, Michael Carrick's got Middlesbrough playing some pretty decent stuff. You know what I mean? So I've gone with that. But I take the Norwich game, and there was a couple of kind of early wins under Carrick that actually were massively important in terms of just turning things around, weren't they? But I have gone for that Bramall Lane win.
That Sheffield, it felt like I was writing about a Borough statement of intent every week at that stage.
Yes.
And that Sheffield United game was undoubtedly one of those. Do you think that was performance of the season then, the win at Sheffield United?
I think it was. I mean, there was obviously a couple of home games where they scored a lot of goals, wasn't there? Preston being probably the obvious example. But in terms of the best all-round display against a really top quality opposition, I think you'd have to go with that Sheffield United win, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so.
My best team performance of the season would have to go to Brighton.
Yeah, well, I wasn't there that day.
In that FA Cup game, who, considering Borough, that, it was at the stage of the season when Borough were probably playing as well as they had at any stage. And, I don't think many Borough fans would argue if I say that Brighton absolutely wiped the floor with them. But we've all seen since just how good Brighton are. At the time, Brighton were, I don't know, maybe 8th, 9th, 10th, someone will know, but they weren't quite where they're at now. I think since we've seen just how good that Brighton team is, and obviously McAllister was on his way back from the World Cup, came off the bench, looked unbelievably good. Best team performance in a game, that Brighton one, but best Borough performance, Sheffield United.
Our final category, unsung hero. I've got 2 here.
Okay.
But I'll let you go first.
Well, I'm going to go with, and the ironic thing is it's actually sung quite a lot, but I'm going to go with Leo.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think that the wheels could really have come off in that period. You kind of forget that, Borough clearly did know what they were doing. But for a window of a couple of weeks, it felt a little bit like maybe they didn't quite know what they were doing. And they were kind of scratching around and trying. And if nothing else, Leo steadied the ship. Obviously, with the help of Craig Liddell and Katz for a bit, steadied the ship, got a couple of really important wins. Obviously, there was that big away win at Wigan that got, changed the narrative a bit. Got the away fans singing, built a little bit of a feel-good factor. Now, obviously, there was a couple of home games within that weren't great. But he also brought Hackney into the fold, which was massive in terms of the season. He was also the one that put Tommy Smith in at right back, which made a massive difference as soon as Carrick got in terms of being able to solidify things. And I just think that after what was a pretty messy end under Wilder, because he had that popularity, he at least got the fans back energised and interested and excited, which then helped when Carrick walked through the door. So I'm going to go with Leo, because I just think that period was really important in terms of what happened next.
Yeah, I can completely see that. I went with, I had Darragh Lenihan, but then I kind of felt like towards the end of the season, he wasn't really an unsung hero, because kind of everyone was talking about.
But I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It was a slow burn.
The other one, I think Matt Crooks, I went with, because
that's a good shout.
For a couple of months, he played as Carrick's makeshift centre forward. And kind of talked himself, didn't he, about how surprised he was. He wasn't convinced he was a centre forward. Kind of Carrick had to talk him into it. But when you look back, although he wasn't a key player in the second half of the season, God, he scored some big goals. He scored the goals at Birmingham. He scored the late winner at Norwich that we've talked about. He scored a goal at Bristol City that felt big at that time, because they were just starting to have a little bit of a wobble. So I think Matt Crooks as well. And when Carrick's talked again and again and again about the importance of his squad and the importance of characters and the importance of unity, Crooks has the look, and you know, both from the outside looking in and when you speak to him, of someone who's a big character in the dressing room.
And to be fair, and Carrick will drop his name in quite regularly in that kind of Johnny House and Paddy McNair, Dale Fry leadership group that's obviously there. That's the core of that dressing room. You know, Matt Crooks' name will regularly be dropped into that by Carrick. So I think you're right. I think, you know, on the pitch he did score some really important goals. But I think you're right. I think probably his importance is just in and around the place and being the part of the glue that holds everything together as much as anything else.
And for all, obviously, it didn't work out like this. When he came on against Coventry, you thought, well, if anyone's going to pop up with a moment here, it's going to be him. And I actually thought it was him that nodded it in when it was Archer that was obviously
right at the end,
offside. But that wasn't meant to be. We won't reopen those.
We won't dwell on that too much. No.
Cheers, Scott. Well, I think we agreed on the most part. Let us know whether you agree or disagree with our picks. As ever, get involved by getting involved with the comments section. Tweet us, email us, and we have got some issues and some subjects that you want us to discuss in various videos.
Yeah, I think I saw in one of the comments a best Borough 11 from all the time we've been covering the club, which I think will be quite interesting.
So,
you know, for me that goes back 2 decades, and for you it'll be Neely.
So that'll be, I'll get my thinking cap on.
We'll get our thinking caps on for that one. So if you're watching this as well, get your thinking caps on, because we'll definitely want yours on the bottom of that. But we'll do that as one in the next couple of weeks, a best Borough 11 from the 20 years or so when we've been covering it.
Yeah, we've got some special guests lined up for the coming weeks, and before we know it, it'll be pre-season, and we'll be doing our predictions for the coming season that can be held against 12 months down the line. But cheers for that, Scott. Thanks very much, and thanks to all those watching and listening. I hope you have a great weekend.
Cheers.